Thank you, and thank you to all our panelists for their contributions. I think we've heard some extremely rich presentations and very detailed presentations. And for me, one of the most interesting aspects of this subject is the dynamic between the politics and the policy and the science, on the other hand. And Hans van Steen mentioned that the Renewable Energy Directive target is, of course, a target for 10% renewable energy and not for biofuels. But the original intention, the original goal as set out at the European Council was for biofuels. And I think that's one example of where you can see the policy-making process reacting to a changing scientific debate. And I'd like to turn back to Hans, if I can, to get your views on what you've heard so far, and in particular on this question of indirect land use change. Can you give us, you said you've had some very diverse contributions, but what's the Commission's thinking on indirect land use change?
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you to the previous speakers. I think indeed there were some very interesting contributions, and you can also see the predicament in which the Commission finds itself on the whole indirect land use change debate, because you've heard very, very different views on the matter, and as always the Commission is caught in the middle. I'm sitting here in the middle today, actually quite illustrative in that sense. Let me first perhaps say you're absolutely right in pointing out that this is a renewables in transport target, the 10%. That I think was always the intention of the Commission. It's true that the European Council in March 2007 said something slightly different, but that was the way we interpreted it. And what we understood was that all member states were very happy with that, because that does actually give a little bit of flexibility in terms of meeting that in different ways. It's also, I think, important to understand the issue about how you actually account for these 10%, because that is not normal accounting, if you wish. There are things that will count double, like second generation, and as Jeremy said, there are difficulties in actually defining that. There is a definition of what counts double in the directive, and therefore we do actually see now in some of the renewable energy action plans that member states are producing that they are not foreseeing 10% renewables in transport, technically speaking, because they're foreseeing a lot of second generation biofuels, and for that reason they are still in compliance with the directive with a lower figure. Similarly, there are special accounting rules for electric vehicles. They count in different ways. They even count in different ways in different member states according to the share of renewable electricity in those member states. So it's not as straightforward as some people say, and quite often we see in the debate there are people calling for the abolishment of the biofuels target. In reality, there is no such target. I think it's a point that cannot be made actually too often. It's an oversimplification to put it like that. Now, on the question of indirect land use change, the directive is very clear. It says the Commission has to come forward with a report, and if appropriate, that's, as you will recognize, really Euro speak, if appropriate, with a legislative proposal to address the issue. And we've been trying to do that in the best possible and the most transparently possibly way that we could. We've released a lot of studies. We've released a lot of additional information to these studies in response to access to documents requests. So we're really trying to do this in the most possible, in the most transparent way we can. Because the last thing we want to be accused of, and we think it's really unfair when we are, is that we're trying to manipulate science, or we're trying to hide data or facts about this thing. That is certainly not the case. You will be thoroughly disappointed if you are expecting to hear from me today what the Commission is going to do about it, because we still have some weeks to go, and there are colleagues who are working very, very hard on this matter. What we do need to do, though, quite clearly, is first of all to come to a view of the Commission, the size of the phenomenon. That is basically saying what can we draw from the studies in terms of deciding the real impact. And as it has been said by several people, we're talking about something here that you cannot measure. It is unmeasurable. You can estimate it on the basis of modeling, but you cannot actually go out and measure it and say that is the way it is. That is, of course, what creates difficulties, because then we're working with models, and you know all, I'm sure, that models depend on the assumptions, so what you put into the model will deeply reflect what you get out of the model. That's also why, of course, we have different results from the modeling work. We're looking at all that in the best possible way we can. The second question that we then need to address is that once we've come to a conclusion on that, what is the best possible way of addressing this? And we've heard different views from the panel on that. Of course, the Commission is listening to all of that. We think that this will send a very important signal. This will create incentives if we decide to address it with a regulatory proposal of some sort, whether it's an ILUC factor, whether it's some type of precautionary action raising the minimum thresholds for greenhouse gas savings required by biofuels, which was another of the options which we listed in our consultation document. All of these things will have important effects in terms of the incentives they create, and the incentives have to be right. The incentives have actually to address the issue in a positive way. And there are questions here which still needs to be looked at and agreed, including between the different services. And you should be aware that this is not an issue where DG Energy is only responsible. There are also a responsibility for this in DG Climate, because exactly the same requirement is included in the Fuel Quality Directive. Therefore, we're doing this in very close cooperation with our colleagues, and I see some of them in the room tonight from DG Climate, and we're trying to do that in really a cooperative spirit so that at the end of the day we come up with the best possible proposal. But of course tonight I cannot tell you what the results would be. I'm not sure anybody would really have expected me to be able to do that. That would have been the real scoop for the next European Voice edition. I cannot do that. What I can tell you is that we're working very, very hard on actually getting the best possible solution to this extremely complicated issue. I'm a little bit worried if this is going to be turned into an ILUC debate only, because, I mean, of course, ILUC is an issue, and indeed, if it is the case that indirect land use change cancel out other positive greenhouse gas effects of biofuels, it is a very serious issue, but there are many other issues related to biofuels that we should not forget, also when it comes to decarbonization.
Thank you. I'll come back to some of our other panelists shortly, but can I see if there's anyone in the audience who would like to come in at this point? Okay, I see a few hands. So I'll take some contributions. Please, can you introduce yourself and your organization, and keep your question or comment short and to the point. I'll start with the gentleman here.
Thank you very much. My name is Jeff Seisler. I'm from Clean Fuels Consulting here in town. We're talking about biofuels, but there are two generic categories of biofuels. There's liquid biofuels and there are gaseous biofuels. The gaseous ones being 100% sustainable because it's made from garbage, sewage, urban waste, agricultural waste. It's made at about 50% energy efficiency. If you make it into synthetic fuel, it can go up to about 70%. About 7.5 million tons of oil equivalent of biogas was produced in 2008. And when you put it into a car, it can reduce the CO2 impact on a well-to-wheel basis over gasoline by as much as 180%, because you're taking stuff off the ground that otherwise turns to methane. Now, with all of those things in its favor, why are we just talking about liquid biofuels? Why haven't we spoken more? We've mentioned biomass, but why isn't there more discussion in part of this umbrella of biofuels about biogas?
Thank you. I'll take a group of questions. Let me go to the gentleman at the back.
Thank you. Well, my name is Raffaello Garofalo. I'm representing the European biodiesel industry. Well, we do produce, I think, around 2/3 of biofuels produced in Europe as biodiesel industry. And I have two questions which I hope will give a positive contribution to your debate. The first one is, there is a lot of talk about producing biofuels, and specifically in this case, biodiesel from waste. Now, the directive sets the basis for doing this, but there are a lot of obstacles, especially in Germany or in other member states, in order to use, for instance, tallow or animal fats waste in order to produce biodiesel. So my question is to all the panelists and to the Commission, how are we going to handle this? Because we are told, for instance, in Germany by the oleochemical industry, well, don't touch this because this is my product, this is my supply. So it is somehow contradictory. Second question, about ILUC. We have now a directive, and all of us agree that this is a basis for discussion. This directive is very wise, I think, and it sets a principle which is, we are not going to consider biofuels in the absolute, but we are going to consider biofuels comparing them with what we have to replace, which is fossil fuels, correct? Now, we are opening a debate on ILUC, and this debate, we are opening it in the absolute. We are only looking to the indirect land use change effects, carbon weights of biofuels. But I think it would be much more wise if we were to apply the spirit of the directive and what's inside. Why don't we make a debate comparing the indirect land use change effects of biofuels with not only the indirect, but also the direct externalities of oil on our planet and on environment? I mean, why are we only considering ILUC in the absolute? We have to compare. And out of this comparison, then we will have some kind of answer. So my question is, if and when can we envisage not a study on ILUC in the absolute, but a study comparing information about ILUC with information about what I call IDUC, indirect and direct oil use consequences? Because 4 million tons of oil in the oil spills, out of which 600,000 in the Mediterranean is not
I think we've
little
got,
thing.
we've got the question.
It's really my question.
Yes.
How and when are we going to produce this study? Okay. Thank you.
Jostings, could I turn to you to reflect on the